Hey everyone, welcome to our junior high interactive family experience. My name is Pastor Ethan and I'm so excited that you are participating online today. How is lockdown and online learning going? Are you frustrated? Are you missing friends? Do you feel like you want to quit school? Or maybe you're loving it. Maybe you're really enjoying not having to see people every single day and you're loving the all-day pajama life. Either way, know that I'm thinking about and praying for you and your family. I mean, lockdown has its ups and downs, and so you guys have definitely been on our heart. Now, congrats to last week's competition winner. I bet your Tim Hortons gift card made last week a little bit easier. Now, in a moment, we're gonna see what you need to do for this week's Tim Hortons gift card prize. But before we get there, we have a couple things to talk about. Today marks 2 full weeks of our 21 days of prayer and fasting campaign. Are you still going strong? We've heard from many of you about how great of a reset this has been. So let me encourage you, keep going. You've got this. You can do it. If you haven't been participating, no worries, it's not too late to start. You can participate in the digital detox by cutting out social media for the next week. You can begin doing the daily connection times by accessing the daily tools in our LakePoint app. And you can certainly still sign up and fast some meal times and pray over the list of names that have been submitted by people in our church family. You can opt in by just going to the LakePoint app, and you can click on the banner titled 21 Days of Prayer and Fasting. All right, let me quickly tell you what you can expect for today. We are gonna put our competition faces on and have some friendly family competition. We are gonna jump into week number 4, the final week of our series titled Moods, and then all throughout our teaching video today, we are gonna pause for some discussion time. Now, parents, today, you are going to lead your student in a few different activities and discussions, and those activities can be found and downloaded from an email I sent out this past week. If you didn't get that email, make sure you let me know so we can add you to our mailing list. The best way to do these interactive experiences is leading those activities and discussions with your student. In fact, it's the entire reason why we do this every week, so that you can have a clearer window into the spiritual development of your student and to create a space where you are helping them grow into everything that God created them to be. So if you need to pause the video and go download those activity pages, please do so now. All right, we are about to get into our series, but before we do that, we want to hear from you. We want to stay connected and we want to check in, and so we have something called a connection card where we can do that. The connection card is found right on the main page of the LakePoint app, and so we would love if you would take the next 60 seconds to fill out the card. It's basically like signing our guest book and letting us know you were here. So let's take the next 60 seconds and fill out the card together.
2, 1.
Thanks for completing the connection card and signing our guest book. Now, every week, Here at junior high, we have some friendly family competition. And today, you and your family are going to put your speed and vocabulary to the test. Check it out. In today's family competition, we are going to see how many words you can come up with in a specific category. Let me tell you how it works. I'm going to give everyone the same category, everyone in your family, and your job is to write down as many words as you can think of that fit into that category. You'll only have 30 seconds. And so the family member with the most amount of words at the end of 3 different categories will be our champion. So let's get to it, shall we? All right, who won? Who had the most amount of words out of all 3 categories? Now, typically, we would encourage you to let us know who won through our Facebook group. But because over 200 Lake Pointers are doing a digital detox with our 21 days of prayer and fasting campaign, we aren't going to be using Facebook. But what you can do is you can email or text me the winner and I will send them a prize. All right, we are going to switch gears and head to the teaching portion of junior high. So check out our series video. When I was in probably grade 5 or 6, I would go over to my neighbor's house almost every single day. And I would go to their house because they had so much more to do at their house than what we had to do at ours. I mean, they had this huge sandbox with all the toys you could think of. They had a full-on jungle gym with monkey bars and a swing and slides. And they had a gaming console where we could play Mario Kart. But the thing that excited me the most about going to their house was playing with their Lego. I mean, we had Lego at home, but it was just like random bags of Lego. They had a full sets of Lego. They had specialty Lego. They had rubber wheels that would go on their Lego vehicles. And we just had to pretend that our Lego at home could be a vehicle. I mean, it was pretty epic. But the older I got, the more jealous I became of their Lego collection. And so one day, I actually stole one of their Lego men. I snuck it into my pocket while they weren't looking and brought it back to my house. Well, I felt so guilty for stealing, and I was too embarrassed to bring it back to them. So what I did, and I'm not proud of this, but I dug a hole in my backyard and I buried the Lego man in the dirt. Problem solved, right? No, wrong. Because every time I went to their house, I had to walk through my backyard. And every time I walked through the backyard, I got this really, really gross feeling inside. I was experiencing something called guilt. Now, eventually I broke down and I told my parents, and then they made me dig up the Lego man and return it. And it was super, super, super embarrassing. And so today, we are in week 4 of our series titled Moods, and we're gonna be talking about that very feeling that I experienced, the feeling of guilt. Now, parents, in our teaching video today, there are going to be a few different spots where the video will encourage you to pause, and it'll tell you to complete an activity or a discussion question. This is where you're going to pull out those downloaded activities and question guides to do as a family. And again, those activity downloads can be found in the email I sent out this past Wednesday. All right, I'm excited to learn today with you, so let's jump into week 4 of our series titled Moods.
If you could do anything in the world and get away with it, what would you do? If you knew there would be like no punishment, no consequences, and no regret. I mean, like, would you play video games all day long? Spend all your parents' money on your very own sneaker collection? Eat dessert for every meal? Take one of everything from your favorite store? Hack into your teacher's computer and give yourself all A's? Ooh. I'm sure we could all make a pretty long list of things we'd do if we were 100% sure we wouldn't experience any consequences for them later. Because as I'm sure you know, there's nothing worse than having to face the consequence of something you did wrong. One time, at my church, across the street, they had just recently built this Target, and the street that it was across, it was like 5 lanes, and I really wanted candy when I was in middle school, and I thought, hey, you know what? I'll just kind of leave the church property and cross this 5-lane road to get to Target and buy some candy and come right back, and no one would even know. But my mom found out, and it was not a good day for me. You've been there though, right? Maybe your punishment or consequence wasn't exactly like mine, but I'm sure you've experienced something similar when you've broken a rule or done something wrong, and it probably made you feel a bit like this person. In fact, that experience or feeling is exactly why we don't do all the things we might wish we could do without regret or consequence. We want to avoid getting in trouble. We want to avoid feeling like this. We want to avoid letting people down. We want to avoid the feeling of guilt. And guilt is one of those moods or feelings we experience when we've done something we know we shouldn't have done. It's the shame or regret or weight we feel when we know we've made a mistake or a choice that's hurt us or someone else. And that feeling can stick with us for a really long time. In my experience, I've learned there are 2 kinds of guilt. First, there's false guilt. This is when we feel guilty about something, but we're not actually guilty of anything. And sometimes we bring this false guilt on ourselves. We're hard on ourselves, so when we get a lower grade on a test than we wanted, or forget to do our chores, or accidentally hurt a friend's feelings, or unintentionally leave someone out in group. We get overwhelmed with guilt, and we carry that guilt around with us. We feel like we made a huge mistake, and we beat ourselves up about it because we feel guilty. In reality, we don't have to. We didn't do those things on purpose. We didn't bring those things on ourselves. But false guilt tells us otherwise. The second kind of guilt is real guilt. We feel guilty because we are guilty. We know we told that lie, or that we cheated on that test, or we spread that rumor, or we hurt that friend on purpose. We know that the things we did or said was wrong. We know that we hurt somebody. And because of that, we feel guilty. The problem is, we're not really sure what to do with the guilt that we feel. Some of us try to ignore it. We deny it. We act as if we did nothing wrong or have nothing to feel guilty about. We do our best to pretend the guilt just isn't even there. But what I've learned from experience is that ignoring guilt only makes it more powerful. It gives it more time and space to grow into something bigger, something that has more power to motivate us to make more bad choices or tell more lies to cover up the guilt we're trying to avoid in the first place. And eventually, the weight of the guilt becomes too much to carry. Just look at this thing. I can barely hold this thing up. It's carrying so much guilt that it's weighing us down and impacting us in some not so great ways. And the truth is, the more we try to run from guilt, the more it has the potential to control us. The more it has the power to take over and be the boss of us. Others of us struggle with guilt because honestly, we don't think we feel it. We do something that we know is wrong and something we shouldn't do, and well, that's it. End of story. Maybe we get caught, get punished, experience a consequence, or maybe we don't. Either way, we don't really feel guilty about what we've done. We don't carry that backpack full of guilt around with us. Some of us maybe even wonder if we should feel bad about not feeling all that bad. I mean, shouldn't we feel a little guilt at some point? Sometimes we even let guilt turn into anger. We get mad at ourselves for what we did. We get mad that we got caught. We get mad that we don't feel guilty enough. We get mad that we can't just do whatever we want without consequence. And eventually, that anger leads to making more choices that lead to more guilt. And the cycle just goes on and on. Here's what I want you to see about guilt. Just like any emotion, the feeling itself isn't bad. When we experience guilt, it's a sign to us that something is off. Something needs to change. Something needs to get right within us. And that's a good thing in my opinion. If we didn't experience guilt, we wouldn't be able to recognize when we needed to take a step to change or make something right. It's not the guilt itself that I want you to run from. It's letting it control you, push you, boss you around into believing something that just isn't true about you. It's when the guilt becomes so great that it weighs you down and controls how you feel and how you act. Now maybe you're sitting there thinking, well, of course you're talking about guilt at church. I mean, isn't that what church is supposed to do? Make you feel guilty? Actually, no. In fact, Jesus actually came to save us from ever having to let our guilt control or boss us around. And I know that not just because the Bible says it, but because I've experienced it. I've experienced the freedom from guilt that I want you to experience too. To help us get there, I'm gonna look at a passage in the Bible written by a guy named Paul. Now, a little background on Paul. He wasn't always the incredible leader of faith that most people remember him to be. Sure, he did a lot of amazing things to spread the message of Jesus and grew the early church. But before that, he was a completely different person. In fact, he even had a different name, Saul, like with an S, Saul. And as Saul, well, he did a lot of really bad, like really terrible things. Things he had plenty of reason to feel guilty about. Things like lying and hate and even murder. And then Saul had an experience with Jesus and everything changed. I mean, even his name changed. He literally went from being called Saul with an S to being called Paul with a P. But what didn't change was the past. The fact that Paul had done a lot of things that made him feel guilty were still there. A lot of things that might have made him believe he shouldn't even show up at church, let alone be a leader. That's what I think makes what he wrote here all the more interesting. Let's take a look. So now there is no condemnation for those who belong to Christ Jesus. And because you belong to him, the power of the life-giving Spirit has freed you from the power of sin that leads to death. So let's start with the first part of Paul's passage, the part where he talked about condemnation. One of the reasons we don't want to deal with our mistakes or mess-ups or sins is because it leaves us feeling condemned. That's probably not a word most of us know or would even use, but it really just means to be guilty, to have the kind of guilt that is so big and so heavy and so overwhelming that you can't get out of it. The kind of guilt that makes you believe you'll always be defined by or running from your mistakes. The kind of guilt that weighs you down and holds you back. Maybe you're carrying that kind of guilt. Maybe you feel condemned because of something you've done. But immediately in this passage, Paul said that it doesn't have to be this way. Let's take a look one more time at what exactly he said. So now there is no condemnation for those who belong to Christ Jesus. Paul said that if we believe in Jesus, there is no condemnation. There's no guilt too big to keep us from him. There is no guilt too heavy to weigh us down because Jesus set us free. And Paul finished with saying this: the power of the life-giving Spirit has freed you from the power that leads to death. When Jesus came to earth and died on the cross, he took the weight of all our mistakes with him. He took the power of those mistakes, which leads to the death of things like our relationships, our future, our reputation, and so much more. And instead, Jesus gave us the power of his Spirit, the power that brings us life, and that is a power stronger than guilt. Guilt doesn't have to be the boss of you. Paul experienced this firsthand. Because of Jesus, Paul was able to step out of the guilt of all the things he'd done in the past. Now, of course, none of us are dealing with the weight of things that Paul was, like murder, but we're all probably dealing with guilt in some form or another. Maybe it's the thing you said to your mom, or the way you treated that girl. Or maybe it was the lie you told your teacher, or the way you talked to your siblings. Maybe it's the habit you know it's wrong, but you can't seem to stop doing. Maybe it's something you regret, something you wish you'd done differently, something that's left you with some guilt. And if you're not careful, that guilt will tell you what to do. It'll tell you to stay away from church, to hide what you've done and to cover up your mistakes. It'll lead you to not ask forgiveness and to keep ignoring the guilt in hopes that it'll just go away. But Jesus gives us a different option. He gives us a chance to start over. He gives us grace. He gives us freedom. Is this a free pass to do whatever we want? No, not at all. But it's a new way to look at the mistakes that we've made, a freedom to try again, a way to not be weighed down by our feelings of guilt. It's a chance to get rid of our guilt once and for all. Guilt doesn't have to be the boss of you. So because we find freedom from guilt when we follow Jesus, here's what I want you to know. You can stop being so hard on yourself. Maybe you're someone who struggles with a lot of false guilt. Or maybe you're someone who struggles with the weight of guilt that others try to put on you. Or maybe you're someone who is dealing with very real guilt for some very real mistakes right now. No matter where you fall, the truth is that there's grace. And that means that Jesus isn't hard on you. So you can stop being so hard on yourself. You can stop beating yourself up for what you've done or what you feel. You can stop believing the lies that guilt or even other people tell you about who you are because of what you've done. Instead, you can embrace the grace that Jesus gives you to live guilt-free. You can stop being so hard on others. This one I know we all do sometimes, because it's easy to look around and think about all the reasons we know other people should feel guilty for what they've said or what they've done. It's easy to let that define who they are in our minds. But when we accept Jesus' grace for ourselves, we can and we should also extend it to others. It doesn't mean that what they did or said wasn't wrong or hurtful, but it does mean that we can offer them forgiveness and a chance to start over, just like Jesus offers us. Even if they don't ask for it, we can still extend grace and forgiveness. You can let guilt remind you, but not define you. Remember how we said that guilt doesn't have to be a bad thing on its own? It can be a sign to us that something isn't right, that something needs to change. And because of Jesus, that's where it stops. Guilt can remind us of the path we've walked before. It can help us not go down that road or make those same mistakes again. But it doesn't get the final say in who we are. It doesn't get to define us. You can make it right. This one is big. Sometimes we think when we do something wrong, the most important thing for us to do is just pray and ask God for forgiveness. And while that's a really important step, it's not the only step. Often we need to be brave enough to make it right with the other person. Whatever it is that you're feeling guilty about doing or saying that may have hurt someone else, you need to work to make it right, to apologize, to ask for their forgiveness as well, to try and do better next time. It isn't always easy to keep guilt from defining who we are. I get it. That's why we have groups to not only extend grace to you, but also help you extend grace to yourself, to help you move past the decisions you've made and the things you've done, so that the guilt can remind you instead of define you. Remember, guilt doesn't have to be the boss of you.
What a great way to end our series. Guilt doesn't have to be the boss of you. I think if we can understand that and process through our guilt in a healthy way, it's going to have the potential to make you feel like your day is so much lighter. Guilt weighs pretty heavily on us. I mean, for me, when I buried the Lego man in my backyard, it weighed so heavily on me that after a while, I couldn't even go in my backyard anymore because of how guilty I felt. I don't want you to experience that. So let's deal with our guilt in a healthy way by not being so hard on ourselves and others, by letting guilt remind us that maybe there's something inside us that needs to change, and then by actually going and making it right. So thanks for participating today. I hope you have a great week at home. Now remember, you could email or text me to let me know who the winning family member was from our competition today, and I will send you a prize. To close our time this morning, take the next 2 minutes to pray together as a family, and then head to the LakePoint app to access our weekday devotionals that go along with our series. You'll find them in the family resources section. You can also find the link in the video description right below me. Have a wonderful week, friends. We'll see you next time.